Welcome to Tanya Today. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zichron Kadesh in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. We welcome. Everything is working with the video okay?
What's that, Rabbi?
The video on Facebook, everything is okay?
It appears to be.
Okay, good. All right, I just seen something on the side over here that I don't know if it. Okay, good. All right. So we welcome TJ from Melbourne. Welcome, Terrence. Michael in Germany, shalom. And Simcha is with us in Florida. Welcome. John in North Carolina, good morning. Eugenia is in Calgary. Are you still snow covered? Enjoy the snow. Davida, Liba, twin sisters in New York. Good morning. Mark in Santa Rosa. Welcome, Mark. I don't think I've seen you for a bit. Tim in Texas, Boker Tov. Jan is in Mexico with us. Welcome. Andrea in Phoenix. Leah is with us in Florida. Miriam in Colorado. Good morning. June, good night in Australia. Diane in Arizona. Early morning. Robert, shalom to you in Boston. And Clem is with us all the way in Brisbane, Australia. Rena, Boker Tov in Colorado. Irma is in New Jersey, visiting, I think. David in Gold River, California, where he says it's beautiful. Sure it is. Rusty in Texas, welcome. And it's a bit choppy, you say. Okay. Lori in North Carolina, Boker Tov. Dam is in Indonesia with us. Mogu, to remind me, I don't remember. Heather in Connecticut. Natalie in Japan. Okay, good evening. Natina in Canada. Erica in Norway, we mentioned. Okay. We have in Clubhouse, we have with us Vilma Bachia and David, Eliana, Michelle, Tim, Andrea, Celeste, Adam, Amalia, Moshe, Selena, Raylene, I hope I pronounced that right, and Alexander. Okay. Instagram, we have Schnappers with us. We have Karen, Yochevet, Niente de la Venta, Hobby something. Okay, and Akoi. Beautiful. We begin and conclude today, the 8th chapter. In one word, usr, prohibited. So Alter Rebbe says the following. The word in Hebrew, usr, means, we translate it prohibited, but it means bound. So what does it mean exactly something's bound? Bound to extraneous negative forces. It means it can't be uplifted. So, for example, he says, let's say a person, let's say, someone who's Jewish who is incumbent upon them to eat kosher, and they unwittingly it was a mistake, right? A mistake was made, and for some reason they ate something that wasn't kosher. But they actually ate the food with a mindfulness, an intent that, not for the pleasure, but for the strength that they can have from that food. They can learn Tanya, they could learn Torah, or they could do, good in this world. They need the strength in order to do it. And they, in fact, do good afterwards. They do study, or whatever the case may be. The Alter Rebbe says that food that's giving vitality, since it's bound to extraneous negative forces because it's not kosher, cannot be elevated. It cannot be absorbed into the Torah study that a person is engaged in that would be elevated because it's captive in Sitra Achra, in the three unclean klipas, and therefore the energy of those foods can't be elevated to sanctity. Not even if it's just a biblical prohibition, even it's a rabbinic. So how do we understand that? We'll come back to that. Okay. Therefore, says the Alter Rebbe, that there are two kind of negative impulses that a Jew will have. One will be for an impulse for really unkosher things, and the Alter Rebbe calls them demons. Two types of demons, we'll see. This demon is a non-Jewish demon that wants things that a non-Jew can partake in, but a Jew can't, right? A non-Jew can partake in bacon, can eat bacon, not a problem for a non-Jew to eat bacon. For a Jew, it's a problem. Huge, huge one. Right, giving that as by example, simple one. So the impulse for that is an impulse that for something that is asur, prohibited, meaning it's bound by negative forces. So the impulse and the desire for that, that's a non-Jewish demon. The Alter Rebbe quoting from the Zohar. But then we have another kind of demon in us, and that's a Jewish demon. Right? They're both demons. But what's the Jewish demon? For things that are permissible. You know, you might see a lot of religious people. I'm not suggesting it's a good thing, not at all. You can look at me, so see that. Don't buy into that. Being very heavy. Why are they heavy? It's because permissible things, they will, that's the Jewish demon. Kosher food and indulging in it, right? You get it. So, since it is kosher food, for example, Jewish demon, permissible activity, but, without the right intent, without mindfulness of connecting it to holiness, but it is still, the food itself is permissible. It's missing the proper intent, of the proper mindfulness. Therefore, it could revert to holiness, right? After a person is mindful and aware and, regretful that they, quaff down that, lemon meringue pie, whatever. And does tshuva, right? Now, as we mentioned, and the Alter Rebbe mentions it again, so the fact that a person, does tshuva, regular kind of penitence, so from here on in, that vitality of that permissible food can now be absorbed in the mitzvahs that we do and be elevated and sanctified. The food, right, as it becomes your flesh and blood. However, there's still going to be some kind of remnant of negative force because, when you engage in it, the Jewish demon, the permissible thing, and just, seeking just the pleasure thereof. Therefore, the body must undergo, as we've explained a couple classes ago, 2 classes ago, purgatory of the grave, which means purging the negativity that's there to cleanse. And that the whole idea of purgatory is cleansing. It's nothing more but a cleansing station, right? Nothing more than that, to cleanse and purify from the negative force that, you know. Now, if a person wasn't motivated or didn't seek pleasure, so they don't have what to be cleansed for. Well, we have such an individual that the Talmud speaks about, Rabbeinu HaKodesh, Judah the Prince, who is the redactor of the Mishnah, very holy person, lived in the 2nd century, extremely wealthy, he had it all. He wasn't missing even lettuce in the winter months, where, you know, it didn't grow then in the locale where he was in Israel, as far as I understand. But still, he had it on his table. But yet, he had it on his table, but he didn't seek it for its pleasure. It was part of, you know, serving God. So, so the point being over here, so through such actions, so there's a cleansing process of an individual, right? That's what we, and yet being that it's permissible food, for example, so we can revert to sanctity when we become mindful and, you know, use the energy thereof to serve our higher purpose that we were created for, to serve God. So now the Alter Rebbe goes and explains about, that's all in actions. How about in speech? After all, in the Holy Tongue, the human beings are called medaber, which means communicators. So we're about communication. So how about, you know, innocent idle chatter? Like, you know, talking a whole day about COVID. Innocent idle chatter, right? Now, so the Alter Rebbe says, you know, if a person is like not a person who could use their time and speech in an appropriate way because they're simple, they're ignorant, they're not learned in Torah. Okay, so there's still a cleansing the soul needs to go through, right? For, you know, after all, idle chatter is exactly that, idle, right? It's not changing the world for good. So there is a cleansing the soul needs to go through. So here, the cleansing of the soul, the Alter Rebbe explains, is called Kafa Kela, which means the hollow of the sling, which is the following idea. The soul will experience, after it leaves this world, right, and this is part of the cleansing process, what will it be? From one extreme to another extreme, it will be sort of like this, the sling, like a slingshot, you know, from one extreme to another, from one end to another end. What will be flung? The soul will be figuratively flung between two things. One, it's going to be shown the truth, and the truth is that God gives us every moment of our lives, that there's nothing more precious than that moment that could be used for good, that could be used to study Torah, could be used to do an act of loving kindness, could be do any mitzvah, right? And that's the truth, and your soul is going to appreciate the infinite value of every moment. And then it's going to be slung, and then it's going to experience the idle chatter that it engaged in. And what will that do to the soul? It's going to feel terrible. It's going to feel, you know, I don't know if embarrassment is the right word. Yeah. I mean, and this is only between you yourself, and I, you, myself, and I. right? With the individual themselves and before God, that they'll recognize this. That's called kafakela. In other words, recognizing the truth and that how you didn't use out the truth and live the truth. That itself is the cleansing process. That itself is cleansing for anybody. By the way, try that in your own life. That you think about what is the truth of something and how you didn't live up to that truth. How you failed in that respect. To yourself, not to anybody else, right? That's going to be cleansing for you. That, next time, whatever it is, that you'll be better in that area. It's scouring and cleansing the soul. So that's what happens when it comes to idle chatter, that we could have used our time for a mitzvah. We could have studied Torah. We could have done good, right? So the Alter Rebbe says, so that's in general when it comes to the idea of wasting time. That's the idle chatter, right? Now, especially when someone is aware of the great value of Torah study and wasting time in that manner. So then there's also what motivate if a person is motivated to do something okay. So now the Alter Rebbe says, okay, well, how about if it's not idle chatter? But what if you're occupying yourself in just worldly knowledge? So, and worldly knowledge rather than Torah knowledge. So here, and we'll have to go through the steps over here to get an appreciation. The first point he says is that you have to be careful with worldly knowledge, including science and anything else. And by the way, listen, there's nothing pure about science. I mean, there can be study of pure science, but effectively, everything is people's perspective. But let's leave that aside for the moment. Just the idea of studying secular subjects, science and the like. So Alter Rebbe says, well, there's when you are an idle chatter. So idle chatter is really an activity, talking about COVID, it's pretty idle, which, by the way, I do. We all do, right? And sometimes it's not idle chatter. Sometimes it's important, actually. It's important you're giving some information to somebody to help them if they're going through something. So, yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be idle chatter, but, talking about when it's idle. In other words, when there's no benefit that's coming out out of the conversation, it's just conversation for conversation. So the effect is on your emotional, so to speak, disposition. Idle chatter, it's an emotional thing. But when it comes to intellectual engagement of secular knowledge or science and the like, then what is happening is that you are now not just in purifying your emotional base, but also your intellectual base. Because now there's a defiling of, again, not just the emotions, but of our perspective. Because now what we're entertaining is a perspective that is, a worldly perspective as opposed to a Torah perspective. And therefore, we have to be careful with that, the Alter Rebbe says, because the teachings of the, science of the nations and secular wisdom. I'm not saying that there's wisdom there. That's not the point. But what it's doing is giving you a perspective and an intellectual view on things that may not be a healthy one. May not be a healthy one. So the Alter Rebbe says there's two instances of where this is permissible. One is if you're making a livelihood from, this secular knowledge. So if you're, studying accounting, so you need to know accounting so you can make a livelihood. So then it's permissible. If you are, need to study, psychology because you're becoming a therapist, well, okay, so you need to study that, right? You need to study because it's a tool that's being it's a knowledge that's being used as a tool for something that is serving God, which is wonderful. And then there's another one, and this one is a little more tricky, shall we say? To make a livelihood, that's understood, right? But here's a tricky one, and that is that you're learning these secular knowledge or science, for example, in order that you could serve God better. In other words, and he gives the example of Maimonides and Nachmanides, Rambam and the Ramban, right? Examples of them, that studying the sciences or studying history or studying whatever it is of human wisdom, and there is, Torah acknowledges that it's not divine wisdom, but it's human wisdom, can benefit you if it can benefit you in serving God, right? So then there's a place for it. Then it's not defiling your mind. Where would it defile your mind is if, follow the science because science is the truth. It's all, every scientist has a perspective. It's not pure scientist when it comes to the scientist himself. Everybody has a perspective. Everybody has an agenda. And that agenda is not Torah's agenda necessarily. So this is what the Alter Rebbe says over here. Let's take this apart. So the first point to take apart over here, and the metaphor maybe to understand, to go back, I'm going back now, is the, if someone accidentally, unwittingly, took poison, says, well, I didn't mean to do that. It doesn't matter. It still could kill you. It still has its effect. I didn't mean to do it. It was a mistake. Okay. But the effect is the effect. The same thing is with something that Shalosh Klipas is food that is not kosher. You didn't mean to, but it's like poison. It has its negative effect because it's bound to extraneous forces and therefore cannot be uplifted. Even though you are, you ate that with the complete intent to serve, to do good. But being that it's inherently bound to extraneous negative forces, a shalosh klipas tzmeis, so it can't be uplifted. So that's an important metaphor maybe to appreciate. It's like poison. Poison doesn't matter what your intent is, because in the end, poison kills. Poison kills. That was one point. Second point is about a Jewish demon. So you see that, observant Jews, everybody, has where their challenge is going to be. So your challenge could be with, completely with things that are completely prohibited, or things that are permissible, but you're using it in a lustful way. And that's going to be hopefully most of our challenges is, in the areas that are permissible, we go a little overboard sometimes. Right? And then the point of the cleansing process, whether it's purging or whether it's the hollow of the sling, recognizing the gift that God gives us and how we blew it. Today, when we think about our lives and think about the gift that God gives us, the greatest gift is time, a day that we could accomplish something, a day that we can make a difference in this world. And, we just seeking just, a pleasurable moment rather than doing good. So when we think about that, and I have that, we all have that in our day. Now, and it's not about making yourself feel good about yourself. We all want to feel good about ourselves. So, well, most of my day was productive. Most of my day I did good. That's great. That's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that. That's not the point. The point is that there was time during the day, and that this is not about self-incriminating, about making yourself into a bad guy. You're wonderful. We're all wonderful. We're all wonderful. That's not the point. The point is owning your life. Owning your life, well, God gave you 24 hours, so are you owning it and using it out? So, you used out, a good few hours, but then, now that doesn't mean you don't have to relax. That doesn't mean you don't need sometimes to go on a vacation. None of that. It's not excluding anything, except what it's doing is it's giving us a perspective on how to look at things and how to deal with things. So when we can recognize the wonderful day that God gives us, and He gives us because He needs our mitzvah, it's essential to Him and to us to fulfill our day. So whether it's a prayer, whether it's charity, whether it's an act of loving kindness, or our Torah study together, or other Torah study, when we look at what the truth of that moment was and how I use that moment, that's a good way to bring cleansing from within for ourselves. That's really a great thing. And the final and maybe the most discussable idea here is about secular knowledge, whether it's history, literature, whether it is whether it's science, whatever it is. In the end, it's human knowledge, human wisdom. And not to say that there isn't wisdom there. There is. That's not the point. The point is that to fill your mind with divine wisdom through Torah, well, that's what the Alter Rebbe is trying to do with us over here. To bring us from the human condition into a divine reality, into a godliness, that we rise above. So the human condition is that you're going to be very enamored with human knowledge and human wisdom. The difficulty is that then, learning all of that, then you absorb that knowledge, and then it becomes your perspective on life. And it's not a godly perspective. It's not a Torah perspective. It's not God's perspective. So we have to be careful with that, because it does defile, and that might be a harsh word, but think about it. if it's giving you a perspective on life that is not a godly perspective, so then, that's something to think about. Nonetheless, the Alter Rebbe says, in two conditions, then this wisdom has a place. One is if you need a livelihood and you got to learn this kind of human wisdom, then, for sure. I mean, as long as it's a kosher livelihood, right? You want to become a chartered accountant. You want to become a doctor. You want to become a nurse. All these things. There's wisdom that you need and knowledge that you need to study. So then by all means, because then you're using it for a greater purpose. And then there is, and this is the more difficult thing, is that the wisdom itself becomes not just a tool that I could use to make a livelihood, and from that livelihood, I serve God, but the teachings of the wisdom, the human knowledge, is actually something that's aiding me in becoming a better Jew or a better non-Jew in serving God. So I'm looking at that wisdom as a tool that I could better serve God through it. So, science, if you understand the human body, the more you're going to understand the human body, the more it's going to give you an enthrallment and, a wonderment, and that when you pray to God, that you're going to appreciate God's wondrous miracles in this world, in just our body, how wondrous that is. That's amazing. Or if you're, I read, different articles and different things because whether it's about COVID or it's about health or it's about, world news that's going on, that helps me to serve God better. In other words, I'm not seeking it just so I could, have an insatiable thirst for knowledge. That's not the point over here. That's not the healthy way. That's human, but that's not where the Alter Rebbe wants to bring us. He wants to bring us beyond the human condition, something that's divine. So you're using it in a divine manner for a higher purpose. So, that is pretty powerful now. But that we have to be careful, because don't fool yourself. Make sure that indeed that's what your motivation is. All right. Let's go to some questions, some comments. Facebook, I hope I didn't lose a feed over here. Saw some questions. Definitely. Erica, does food come from an unholy klipas? No. Again, for food, if it's kosher, then it comes from klipas noiga. It's permissible, right? It has good in it, and that's why the intent that we have is important, that we're using for a higher purpose, right? All right. Hope the cake was good and gave you strength. Davida, this applies to Lashon Hara, evil talk, for sure. Well, that's Sholish Klipas Utmeas. He was talking about idle talk. And yet, we need a cleansing. Lashon Hara, speaking ill about a person, that's a prohibition. Absolutely. Alice, is secular knowledge for its own sake not permitted? If I do a beading project versus Lamudi Kodesh, consider idle work, where do we draw the line? I don't know what a beading project is, but if you're knitting something for somebody, That's a beautiful act of loving kindness, right? Which, by the way, you can listen to some Torah wisdom at the same time. I don't know what what the Beating Project, if that's a similar thing. Doesn't mean you have to study Torah a whole day, but do good a whole day. Do good a whole day. So again, secular knowledge for its own sake, as an end in itself, that's where the issue is, because what happens is when it's for its own sake, then its wisdom becomes my wisdom. And I start looking at the world from that perspective. The Alter Rebbe wants us to see the world from God's perspective. And that's what he's teaching us, Tanya, to give us a divine perspective on my life, on the world around me, about my relationships, about every moment of my day. That's pretty powerful. So, now secular knowledge can enhance that, right? Because when you understand it in so many different dimensions, not just how Torah explains it, but how you can see that in secular knowledge, then it's enhancing your godly perspective. Then that's amazing. Davida, isn't it more important to observe this? What's this? On Shabbos more than the weekdays, since we don't bring mundane into the secular on Shabbos. Yeah, true. Yes. Okay, let me get to Instagram. We have some questions on Instagram. Let me find it. Is purgatory before we stand in the heavenly court? No. First you stand in the heavenly. First you need a judgment, and then you need the cleansing. So, it's interesting that by Jewish law, when someone passes away and you say Kaddish for them, the memorial prayer of Kaddish, we say it up to 11 months. 11 months, not more. Why? Because the Kaddish is helping that soul through its process, its journey, which is part of being cleansed, and it takes no more than 11 months. Now, some, if they're righteous, they go right into Gan Eden. Others, it might take, a few days or a week or whatever. But the most it can take is 11 months. 11-month journey of the soul that it goes into Gan Eden. John, when Mashiach comes, will Lashon Hara cease to exist as the three impulsive? Yes, absolutely. Okay, that was one question from Liba. Another question. I only see one question here. Sorry. Lori, can we say Kaddish for a non-Jewish person? I don't think, no, Kaddish we can't say, but prayers we can say for a non-Jewish person. Kaddish is specifically part of the prayer that is specifically a Jewish thing, but you can say prayers for a non-Jew, absolutely. And you can do not just prayers, but acts of loving kindness in the merits of that non-Jewish person and their soul, absolutely. All right, Clubhouse, do we have any questions? Anybody? Really, nobody. Anyway, fascinating discussion over here. as always. Great to have everybody on board. Oh, Yo, Yohakim. Yohakim.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. I'm a chemist, so how do I approach my profession?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
I said I'm a chemist.
You're a
And I wanted to
chemist.
know how do I, yes, and I wanted to know how do I approach my profession.
Okay, thank you for that question. Very, very good. So, um, with complete integrity, with complete, devotion to doing the best you can to be as a chemist in what your field and what your responsibilities are, give it your all. Actually, thank you for bringing this up. I just realized some other thoughts just came to me because of your question. It's not like, oh, I'm a chemist, but really, since Torah is the divine truth and chemistry is, human and da da da. So, no, give it your all. I know that the Rebbe, people that I'm, close with, that that are scientists, and they wanted to learn more Torah and to teach and to do less science. The Rebbe didn't allow them. He didn't allow them. That they had to climb in their field and to progress. And there's many a reason. One reason for sure is, imagine a bearded Jew, a Hasidic-looking Jew who is a chemist or a scientist and teaching med students at McGill University, as my dear friend Dr. Brower. He's retired now, but that's what he did for 35 years. Can you imagine the effect that you have? That you're completely Torah observant Jew, and yet you're a scientist, and that's going to have an amazing effect. So that's an important thing to recognize, that being a chemist and being serving God, and that people recognize that you are a person of integrity and you give it your all, and you're that's great. That's amazing. At the same time, you're giving it your all, but of course, what defines and what makes me is not the fact what I do, right? Not what I do, but who I am. And that's our commitment to Hashem. So yeah, give it all you got.
Thanks.
All right, thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that, because I realize that, just to give a more perspective on this. The Rebbe himself went to Sorbonne University. Was a mechanical engineer, and knew all of this. But of course, and again, using it for a higher purpose, like the Rambam and Nachmanides that the Alter Rebbe mentions in Tanya here, that from that knowledge, it just enhances on how you can serve God. So likewise, the being a chemist and the chemistry that you do can also just give you, on a personal level, a deeper, appreciation of God as creator, which is amazing. Which is amazing. But even beyond that is the fact that, being devoted to it and giving it your all to do the best that you can in the field, and that people look up to such individuals, and when they see that they're committed to a higher ideal of living, as a Jew and with Judaism, as a non-Jew, as seven Noahide laws, and just a sense of that there's a creator and there's a purpose in life, and my life has meaning and value. That's amazing. Thank you for that. Okay, anybody else? Share with us. All right. All right, we will continue. By the way, we have Rambam today, 1 o'clock. Come and join us. A reminder that this Sunday we will be doing a crowdfunding campaign, which I'd like to let you all know about so you can participate if you'd like. If you'd like to help out, that would be amazing. Everything I'm doing over here is coming from this campaign. I'm beyond here. But so it's an opportunity that you can help out. And email will go out. And if we don't have your email, if you could make sure we get your email, that would be amazing. At TanyaRabbi.com, you can give it there. Or just send it to me. It's also good. All right, folks. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zichron Kedoshim in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you, Tanya. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Be gesund and well. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.